Matt. I'm the esports lead at Barclays Games and Esports, and I look after esports really for the whole of the Barclays group across the pieces. So I think a little bit of a background, and the question that we got asked at the very start was, Barclays? Why Barclays? Who are Barclays here? And we knew it going into this that we're a very non-endemic brand. Especially in the esports space, and I think I think David mentioned earlier, we have been doing supporting in the game space as well. And traditionally, we have done a lot of support for both kind of the creative industries and the traditional sports. So hopefully most people would know that we have a kind of a long affinity with traditional sports, including kind of the Premier League we were the title sponsor for a long time. We did ATP tennis, sailing, etc. And when we went to look into the esports space, we want to look about how can we engage but contribute as a non-endemic brand, as a financial institute. How can we be part of this ecosystem in a way that kind of brings something back? We didn't want to come in and be a brand that kind of slapped a label on something they're done. Esports fans will love us. So with our activations, we've kind of really looked at focusing on grassroots. So what is this? What is the start, and how can we grow the UK? And I think that's something that at the very start of the talk Patrick talked about is that the UK being behind the curve. What can we do to contribute to that, to bring the UK up to where it is in terms of games consumption? Because it's one of the top 6, top 5, depending on which stats you go on, consumers of games in the world. What was last time I checked, but nowhere near that from an esports perspective. So we've done this in a kind of number of ways, and I'll come on to that in a little bit. But first of all, kind of what as a brand, what is our key objectives in the space? So we don't have a consumer-facing product, which a lot of brands are in the space for. So it's really an idea to understand the sector from a business perspective. What does the sector need? What does the sector do? Secondly, understand the audience. So I think, again, Patrick and I think other people have said on the webinar so far is that there's a highly engaged, motivated kind of group of individuals that are the esports fan, but they can't be reached through traditional media. So they've got their ad blockers turned off. They don't watch linear TV. So how do you engage with that fan? And also that is becoming more and more apparent as the Gen Z, Gen Alpha come up, is how do you engage with those people? And then lastly, obviously, I talked about understanding the sector. It's about learning from the sector. We didn't want to come in as a brand into the space and say, this is what we think you should do. We kind of wanted to come into the space and learn from it, both from the fans and from the businesses in the esports space. So we've had three activations so far in esports as a brand. Our first activation was we were the headline sponsor for the UKLC Summer Split 2020. So this was a time when things were pivoting. It was organised at the start of COVID, and it was a time when there wasn't much else for people to do and see, and we want to kind of support something that can continue to grow, something to carry on. So headline sponsors, working with DreamHack on that split and supporting UK. And yes, these are semi-pro teams, but with the creation of the NLC, they're still kind of on the cusp of that grassroots kind of, it's the pinnacle of UK, but it's still on that cusp. So we did some really great stuff with them, with the highlights and engaging with the community, and we got some really good feedback from the community of having us as a brand in the space. Our second and our current ongoing activation is we're partnered with the National Student Esports, NSC. So one of the two kind of major collegiate esports organisations in the UK. And with them, we are a sponsor of their British University Esports Championships, BUIC. As well as we've done some other activations and activity with them. Why we chose NSC and the students is, I think I put it in answer to one of the questions about why the UK is behind the curve. As a brand, we wanted to see kind of how the UK market would respond and where the UK is. And with NSC and with the student space, it's quite a defined demographic in the UK. Also, the NSC are kind of looking at esports not just from a TO, people playing esports, but they're also looking at it from a perspective of it's a catalyst for growth for the individuals. So kind of encouraging people to maximize on their activity in esports to grow their future potential. So there's a number of ways they've done this. There's a future gen program, which is about kind of developing the next kind of esports professionals, which I was lucky enough to sit on the judging panel for this year's section. As well as just looking at making people aware that what they're doing in esports is viable from it's worthwhile. It has a lot of what's the word, transferable skills. So there's been, I've spoken to students before who early on were ashamed to put that they were in an esports society on their CV, whereas there is so much that they are giving and offering. From that, they're learning budgeting, they're learning management, they're learning people skills, they're learning teamwork, they're learning marketing. There's so many positives from the esports society. So trying to move away from that stigma is another piece. And then the second activation that we did with NSC was what we called the Games Innovation Challenge. And this is where we kind of wanted to kind of bring the two worlds that we work in together. So it was a challenge, kind of like a games jam, for students to create a competitive game. So creating a game that could potentially be an esport over a 8 to 9 week period. And we had again, this was announced in quite a short period over this. It ended in, I want to say March or April. I should know those figures, but I don't have them on me right now. But we had over 20 teams from universities across the country submit projects, and the judging panel was kind of blown away by the top 3 that we had through, and the rest of the entrants. So again, getting people to think about that esports isn't just about those headline flashy figures as the pro gamer. It's about more than that. It's you can go into esports through a development route, and all those other pieces. And then lastly, the one that probably makes the most sense, and people will probably expect us to be there, which actually our most recent activation brand partnership is the EPL, the E-Premier League, through the FA, where we were a sponsor on their activity, which got great traction. So yeah, all in all, that's kind of why we're here and what we're gaining from it. Any questions?
Matthew, thank you very much for your engagement. I'm quite interested. What was the reaction from people in the games industry when Barclays announced that they were, going to get involved and start doing some more general activities? What kind of response did you get?
So when we first, as a team, kind of started exploring this space, and we came to the likes of, I think, yourselves at Gamescom, and a lot of the questions were, Barclays, the bank? So there's been kind of a traditional, financial institutions have not necessarily been as turned on in this space as other brands. I think part of it is because of the consumer perspective. We haven't got a set product or a set activity to market to somebody, and most of the marketing and the brand kind of partnerships in the space tends to be around a specific thing. So if we go based on what people have already talked about, if you talk about Excel, and Patrick was talking about the low latency broadband, there's a set connection there. Where it's more ethereal, kind of the connection. But we want to be here, and we're a brand that supports the creative industries, and we support the sport. That's quite hard to say. To the point where it makes sense for us to be in that space. And I think something that we're looking at in ways that we can help, not just from those perspectives, but also what can we offer as a brand in the space. So we started looking at things like financial literacy in the space. So you've got a lot of, again, from an esports professional perspective, you've got a lot of young people potentially earning considerably large amounts of money at a young age. So how is that financially stable and financially sustainable? So a lot of the teams are focusing on their mental well-being, their physical well-being. Again, Patrick talked about Fabio's regimes of tracking sleep and things, but financial well-being is something else that should be considered, because that is going to be only going to be helpful to the entire industry, because it's going to help it grow and be sustainable. So you're not going to have those horror stories of people burning out and then having money. It creates a next steps, which I think is good. I think that's also good for the UK ecosystem, especially because you can get people bought into it, not just the enthusiasts, but you can get the parents bought in. If the parents kind of see that this is actually a viable future, I think that's also why we're doing this, the NSC pieces. It's about esports it's growing, it's sustainable, and it is a career option in multiple ways, and that's hopefully we can be helpful on that front.
Yeah, it's interesting. It would be too easy for things like the video game industry just to welcome all brands. Anyone that wants to be involved, we'd love to have them involved. But it's really great to hear that you're doing it using some of that sort of positive leverage and the positive impact you can have. And I'm delighted to say that we've seen majority of that coming into the esports scene so far. Some real valuable brands coming in that are adding significant value. We're dealing with young people here. It's a big challenge. You talk about the sort of the university esports scene. There's been a couple of questions today from people about looking even younger age than that. Do you have any guidance if you're, I don't know, not at university yet, maybe still at school, and you're interested in perhaps looking at this career? What are the kind of routes that you can get into esports on that sort of grassroots level?
It's an interesting one. I think it's something that there is focus on. That there are, like David Johnson mentioned, there are British Esports Association who do work at that level. There's Digital Schoolhouse. I thought got to plug that as well. That do pieces, and I think it's a very good thing. And I think that also not only encouraging kind of looking at esports at a younger age is not only good for the esports community, but it's also good for things like diversity and inclusion. So I think that if you look at kind of the divide between boys and girls from a kind of a traditional sports perspective, that happens in school time. That's when they do PE and sports together. Up to a certain point, suddenly they're divided up, and then it's not right to play together, even though they're fine until there. I think you could have a very similar piece in the digital space. So creating getting that impact early, I think would be very powerful. In terms of routes, obviously there's two things I've mentioned. There's, again, responsibly, there's great communities online. Obviously you hear a lot of horror stories, and I think as parents you need to make sure you are managing your children's online activity, but at the same time there are some great spaces there, as long as you find the right ones and you are aware. And I know that, again, Yuki are running some great activities around that, about, like, I think, is it Know Your Game or something like that, or Know Your something. So be understanding as a parent or as an adult, understanding what your children are being involved with, but then doing that responsibly, you create great connections and next steps. And then there's platforms, again, for the kind of the old, maybe pre-university but older, kind of 16 plus. There are kind of platforms where you can start competing and finding kind of players to compete with. So and
of course, it's not just for players. The industry needs shoutcasters, so commentators. We need technical people to deliver the programs. We need physiotherapists. We need team managers. You need all different aspects. There's so many jobs involved in esports, and this is a really fascinating way. I think it's something that perhaps is a little bit unseen out there. As people look at it, they think just the professional players making lots of money. It's not like that at all. There's a substantial industry out there with a lot of job occupation opportunities. Digital literacy is the most important thing here. How can we get our young people thinking digitally? Yeah. And esports is a sector that will benefit from that in the future. What do we get, without revealing too many secrets? What do you think we're going to see from Barclays around the esports scene, perhaps in the next couple of years? Where do you think you're going to be moving or going?
Well, that's a hard one to answer without revealing any secrets.
I've not prepared you for it either. Sorry, I'm just dropping it straight on top there.
I think that we've set out a route to continue down this route of kind of grassroots and activations that matter. that have a purpose. What I'd love to see, I'm not saying this to say this, but what I'd love to see us do in the next kind of few years is something that capitalizes on our work in gender diversity in traditional sports. Obviously, with our Women's Super League, it's the Barclays Women's Super League in the FA. I'd love for us to kind of be able to reflect that in the esports space. I'm trying to work on something, but there's no guarantee. But that's what I'd love to do. It's kind of a passion project for me. And then just continue this work and see where we can take it. And again, my dream is for us to become an endemic brand, to be a brand that people will, like we are kind of, say, traditional sports and football especially, there's an association there. So I'd love for us to get to that point. That would be fantastic.
Well, long may it continue. You've been an invaluable supporter of the esports scene so far. You've picked your areas that you want to work in, done an amazing job. Please continue to do so. And thank you once again for your support on this event today. I'll be sharing. I'm going to turn your camera off now. We're going to be sending these slides